Okay, so today we're going to look at graphing some more sine and cosine functions and graphing some that have transformations that translate them up or translate them down from that midline of y equals 0. We're also going to have some where the amplitude is still a positive number, but the graph goes, it's basically a reflection because the a value is negative. So we'll look at some of those. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to just do some practice. These are all practice problems. You can decide to fast forward through these if you want. If you feel like you've got it, that's great. But I would definitely say, where there's 9 problems on here, I would definitely say make sure that you look at number 7 and number 7 and number 9 for sure. And then also number 6. So 6, 7, and 9. If you're going to skip through everything, I would say fast forward up to those so you can get those. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. We are using radians. You're going to sketch 2 cycles. So that means you're going to figure out what the period is and then graph that and then continue it for 1 more period. Okay, so identify the amplitude, the period, the midline, domain, and range. Draw the midline as a dashed line or highlight it. So I'm going to start out and look at what is my amplitude. So A is equal to 3. So that means my amplitude is the absolute value of that, which is 3. Then I'm going to look at my value for B. I see that B is 1/2. So I'm going to take 1/2 and I'm going to, knowing that these are in radians, I'm going to take that 1/2 and know that my period is equal to 2 pi divided by b, which is 1/2. So that means my period is going to be 2 pi times 1/2, or, I'm sorry, 2 pi times 2, which gives me 4 pi. Okay, and then my midline, if I look at this, I see that k is equal to -2. So my midline is y equals -2. So those are all important pieces of information that we're going to use when we go to graph this. So I'm going to start out knowing that my midline is at -2. I'm going to go ahead and draw a vertical line, and then I'm going to draw a horizontal line. But I'm going to draw it a little bit higher because I know that my midline is -2. So 1, 2, that's going to be my -2. I also know that my amplitude is 3, so from there I'm going to go down 1, 2, and 3, and I know I'm going to go down as low as -5, and I'm going to go up from here 1, 2, and 3, and I'm going to go as high as 1. So I'm going to go ahead and draw in my midline right now with dashes, so I know that that's where some of my graph is going to hit. And I think I'm going to go out just a little bit farther to make sure I get those 2 cycles. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is my first cycle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is my second cycle. And I know my cycles, or my periods, are 4 pi. So if this is 4 pi, then another cycle will take me to 8 pi. I really would like for you to give me the middle of this. So the middle would be in between 0 and 4 would be 2 pi. Now if you want to write pi here and 3 pi, that's fine, but I would at least like the middle one. And then the middle of this would be 6 pi. Again, if you want to do 5 pi and 7 pi, that's fine. Alright, so let's go ahead and graph this. We know that it is sine, so because it is sine, it's going to start on the midline. So it starts on the midline. So when I'm looking at this, and I know that the amplitude is 3, and A is a +3, I know it's going to behave just like it normally would. It's going to be on the midline, then it's going to go top, then it's going to go back to the midline, then it's going to go bottom, and then back to the midline. So starting here on the midline, then at pi, we're going to go up 3. Then at 2 pi, we're going to go back to the midline. At 3 pi, we're going to go down 3. And then at 4 pi, and I'm trying to see how accurate that is. kind of hard not doing it on graph paper, but we can still estimate, and I'm okay with that. Okay, if this was a test, I would give you graph paper to use. And then here, then we're going to go back. That gives me 1 period. Notice that I started, I went here, then I came back around, and now it's just going to repeat itself. So now we're going to go back to the top. We're going to go back to the midline. We're going to go down to the bottom, and we're going to go back to the midline. And so there's that second cycle that you can see right there. And that's all there is to it. Okay, the last part that you're supposed to give me is the domain, which we all know is all real numbers, and the range. How low is it going? It's going all the way down to -5. And how high is it going? It's going all the way up to 1. Okay, so we've answered all of those questions. Here's our amplitude. Here's the period and the midline. And here's your domain and your range. All right, let's go on to the second one. Okay, so for this one, we see that we're graphing cosine, and we know that cosine is going to be off the midline. Okay, let's look at what we know. We know that A is equal to 4, so that gives us our amplitude. The absolute value of 4 is equal to 4. And then we can look at this and we can get our value for B. B is equal to 1/2. And so if we're trying to find the period and it's in radians, it's going to be 2 pi divided by 1/2, which gives us 4 pi. So our period is going to be equal to 4 pi. Our K value is equal to 0. So that means our midline is going to be that x-axis. But as an equation, we write it as y equals 0. The domain, we already know what that is. It's all real numbers. And the range, we could figure it out, but let's go ahead and graph it and then we'll see. So as I get ready to graph this, I'm going to go ahead and draw in my vertical line. And since my midline is right at the x-axis, I'm just going to draw that. So half of it's going to be up and half of it's going to be down. And I'm going to go ahead and draw 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And notice I made those a little bit bigger so you can see that that's where my period is going to end, and it's going to end at 4 pi. And the next one's going to be at 8 pi. Halfway in between will be 2 pi, and halfway in between will be 6 pi. Again, if you want to fill in the rest, you can. All right, so looking at this, it tells us our amplitude is 4. That means we're going to go up 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to go down 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's how high and how low we're going to go. And if you see that, you can already tell me that the low is -4 and the high is 4, including both of those. If not, you can wait until you graph it. Now, it did say to show me the midline, so I'm going to go ahead and do that with a highlighter. All right, so starting off the line, it tells us that our value for our amplitude is 4. So that means I'm going to start way up here at 4. And then because it's top, middle, bottom, middle, top. As long as A is positive, then that's what it looks like. So we're at our top. Now we're going to come down to our middle. Then we're going to go to our bottom. Then we're going to come back to our middle, back to the top, back to the middle, down to the bottom, back to the middle, and back to the top. So again, it's not going to be perfect, but we're going to do the best we can. Since we're not using graph paper on this one, I forgot to print that on here. And I know a lot of you at home probably don't have graph paper, so this is okay as long as you make it pretty good. Okay, so I can see that. And I can see now that my bottom is at -4 and my top, my maxima is 4 and my minima is -4. So those give me those two values that I'm looking for. All right, so now on to number 3. Number 3 and 4 we're going to do in radians. So those first two are in degrees, and now these are in radians. So we're finding the same information. So let's take a look at what we know. We know we're graphing cosine, so that is going to be off of the midline. We know we want the amplitude, and our A is equal to 1/2. So our amplitude is the absolute value of that. And so our amplitude is equal to a positive 1/2. The period is based on what B is equal to. So B is equal to 4. Since we're using radians, we're going to do 2 pi divided by B, and that's going to give us the period, which is equal to, and, oh, sorry, number 3 we're doing in degrees. Let me back up there and just take that 2 pi and make it 360 degrees. So number 3 we're using degrees. Okay, so now when I divide that, I get 90 degrees for my period. My value for K is equal to -1, which tells me my midline is y equals -1. And our domain we know is all real numbers. And our range, if you want to figure it out now, you can. Know that your midline's at -1. You're going to go up 1/2 and you're going to go down 1/2. So y is going to be between two different values. If you see it, go ahead and write it. But if not, we'll write it later. All right, my midline is at -1, so I'm going to go ahead and draw my vertical axis. And instead of making my x-axis right in the middle of that, I'm going to make it a little bit higher than the middle. And I'm going to go ahead and put in my first period, and it's going to go to 90. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is 90 degrees. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is going to be 180 degrees. Okay? And I could have spread that out a little bit farther. I don't know why I didn't, but I'm going to leave it like that since it's already on there. And let's go ahead and look at how we're going to scale this. Since our midline is at -1 and we have to go down 1/2, I'm just going to scale -1 and -2, and it's going to look like that. Okay, drawing in my midline with a dashed line, it is at y equals -1, so it looks something like that. And now we're going to remember that when we're graphing, since it's cosine, it's going to go top, since this is a positive A, top, middle, bottom, middle, top. So top is going to be starting at 1/2 units above the midline. So it's going to start right here. And then the next one is going to be in the middle. So it's going to go right here. And the next one is going to be at the bottom. Well, halfway in between is going to be right here. So I'm going to bring it down to here. Then we're going to go back to the middle. Then we're going to go back to the top. So our graph is going to look like this for one cycle. But we want 2 of them. That's one period. We want 2 of them, so we're going to continue. And now we're going to go to the middle, and to the bottom, and to the middle, and to the top. And so it's going to look like this. Okay, so you've got your 2 cycles in there, and now we can see our lowest point is at -1.5, and our highest point is at -0.5. And so there is all of our information that we were supposed to get for that problem. Okay, so let's try this next one. This next one, we are using radians. So this one says for number 4 to use radians. And I'm going to write that here so I don't forget, because the last time I tried to do it in radians and it was supposed to be in degrees. Okay, so I noticed it's cosine. So, and our A is positive, it's definitely going to be off the midline. Looking at the information given, A is equal to 4, so that tells us our amplitude. And if you would like, pause the video at any time and go ahead and work these out and come back and check your answer. So our amplitude is equal to 4. Our value for B is equal to 2, so we're going to say 2 pi divided by 2, and that's going to give us pi. So our period is equal to pi. Our midline has to do with our value for K, and it's -2. So our midline is an equation of a line, and that is y equals k. And so y equals -2. I don't know why I wrote -4, but we'll fix that. Okay, so y equals -2. And then domain, we know, since this is a cosine graph, it goes on forever, so all real numbers. And the range, if you want to figure it out, you can. Our midline's at -2, so the lowest we can go is down 4 from that, which would be -6. And the highest that we can go is up 4 from that, which would be 2. And if you see that, you don't have to worry about graphing it. You can just give me that. But let's go ahead and graph. And when I graph it, I'm going to draw my vertical. And I'm going to think about where my midline is going to be. My midline is going to be at -2. So I'm going to draw my horizontal line up here. Because I just need to go down to -2. And then from there, I need to go up 4 units because of the amplitude. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. That takes me to 2. And I need to go down 4 because of my amplitude. So -3, -4, -5, -6. So that gives me that. I'm going to go ahead and draw my midline right now. And then let's draw in our 5-unit summary. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we said the period is pi. So this is pi. Halfway would be pi over 2. If you want to write pi over 4 and 3 pi over 2, that's fine. And then we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. So that'd be 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And since this was pi, one more period would be 2 pi. And halfway in between would be 3 pi over 2. All right, now let's see if you can graph that. So go ahead and pause your video and graph it. Okay, here is how the graph would look. Hopefully you went ahead and graphed that and then you came back. Since it's going to be off the midline, it's going to be 4 units above, so it's going to be up here. And remember, it's top, middle, bottom, middle, top. So top, middle, bottom. You can see how that's going. It's going down like this, and then it's coming down, and it's going to turn and come back up. And when it comes back up, it's going to be in the middle. And then it's going to come all the way back up to the top. So that gives us one full cycle. Looks like that. Now we're going to do another cycle. So we're at the top. We're going to go to the middle. We're going to go to the bottom. We're going to go to the middle. And then we're going to go to the top. And we're going to sketch that. Again, it's not going to be perfect. And that is it. And now you can see that my minimum value down here is -6. And a maxima is at 2. So you can see how we got that range. All right, so we're going to flip this over and look at the back side and see what we have here. Now, for this one, you're given the graph. Let me scoot this down so you can see it. You're given the graph and you're asked to write the equation. In addition to writing the equation, you're asked to state the amplitude, the period, the domain, and range. So this is pretty easy to do. It's easier than graphing. We look and see where we started. So I look here and I see that my top is at 2 and my bottom is at -8. So you can kind of count if you want. Or you can just say, what is -8 plus 2 divided by 2? And when you do, you're going to get a -3. And that tells me that my midline is right here. So my midline is right there. So with that, I can calculate the amplitude. I can also see what period is. So if I look at from here to here, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that means my amplitude is equal to 5 because A is equal to 5. So my amplitude is equal to 5. I also can see that I started on. So this started on, and since it started on, I know that it is going to be sine. So when it's on the midline, it's going to be sine. The other thing I can see is here's our middle, top, middle, bottom, middle. So that means here is where our first period is, and it goes to 360. So our period is equal to 360. So since it's 360 and it's in degrees, I can say that 360 divided by something, that something is B, is equal to 360. Oh, well then B has to be just 1. And the reason why I care about that is because that is part of my equation. Here, the amplitude being 5 gives me A equals 5. Here, the midline being at y equals -3 tells me that K equals -3. So, amplitude, period, domain, and range. Domain is all real numbers, and range, we can see that the low is at -8, and our highest is at 2. And now we're going to use all that information to write our equation. So y is equal to A times sine times 1 times theta, or 1 theta. I don't really need the 1. B is important. If it was a fraction or something other than 1, we would include that, but 1, we don't really need to write 1 theta. And then our K is at -3, so -3. And there is our equation for that sine function. Okay, so again, notice on this, it went middle, top, middle, bottom, middle. And so it followed that pattern, middle, top, middle, bottom, middle. So we know that sine is positive, the coefficient, the amplitude, or the A is positive. The amplitude is always positive, but A is positive. All right, so let's look at this one. As I look at it, I see that I'm going from 5 all the way down to 1. So halfway in between is going to be my midline. And you can count that. You can figure out halfway in between 1 and 5 is going to be 3. And so I'm going to draw that in here. And when I draw that in here, that gives me my y equals 3. That gives me my midline. And that gives me K. The other thing I notice about this is that on this one, remember cosine is always starting off. So I know it's cosine. But with cosine, it usually does top, middle, bottom, middle, top, doesn't it? But this one is doing bottom, middle, top, middle, bottom. And so because it's doing that, that's the pattern. It's not this. It's bottom, middle, top, bottom, middle, top, middle, bottom. That tells me that A is going to equal a negative number. And so this is why I said don't skip this one. So A is going to be a negative number. The amplitude's always positive, but A is going to be negative. So when I look at this distance from here to here is 2 units. So A is equal to a -2, even though our amplitude is equal to a +2, because remember it's the absolute value of 2, of -2. The next thing is we can see what's happening. Here's bottom, middle, top, middle, bottom. So that tells me that right there to here is 1 period. So because that's 1 period, we know that our period is at 1080 degrees. How that helps us is it helps us with the value for B. So A we already know is -2. B, to get B, we're going to take the 1080 and set it equal to 360 divided by B. And when you calculate that, you're going to end up with B equals 1/3. Now you can multiply that and then divide. So you're taking 360 and dividing it by 1080, and you're going to get 1/3. So our B is 1/3, which is another piece of important information that we need. And then our domain is all real numbers, and our range it goes as low as 1 and as high as 5. So 1 all the way up to 5. And you can either write it this way, or you can say it's between 1 and 5, and you can write it as an inequality. Either one of those I will take. All right, so now we're going to use all that information and write our equation. So we have y equals a, and we said a is a -2 because we started with the bottom instead of the top. So we went bottom, middle. So because of that, that means that we're going to have a negative. So just another reminder, it's going to be negative. So cosine, b is 1/3. So we're going to write that as theta divided by 3 instead of 1/3 times theta. And then k is 3, so plus 3. And we have our equation. So you can see here's our a, our b is 1/3, and our k is a positive 3. All right, we have another one here, and this is one that I wanted you to make sure that you did with me. So let's take a look and see where our minima and our maxima are. So it goes all the way up to 2, and it goes all the way down to 10. So halfway in between there is going to be our midline. And you can calculate that if you need to. You can say -10 plus a -2 divided by 2. And that's going to give you a -6. So that's going to be right here. I'm going to go ahead and draw that in. Okay, so there's my midline. That there is y equals -6, which tells me that k is equal to -6. The other piece of information I can get quickly is my value for a, or my amplitude. So from here to here is 1, 2, 3, 4. And from here to here is also 4. Now, I want us to look at this and see, is this sine or cosine? Because it may be a -a. Okay, our amplitude, I know for sure, though, is going to be the absolute value of it, no matter if it's -a or -4 or +4. We know the amplitude is 4. We also have already saved the midline, even though it didn't ask us. So looking at this, we're starting on the midline. So if it's on the midline, we know that that's going to be sine, right? We know it's going to be sine. And sine usually is middle, top, middle, bottom. I said that wrong. Usually goes up and then down and then down and then up and then up again. But on this one, as we look at it, it goes middle, bottom, middle, top, middle. Now, usually with sine, it doesn't go that way. It usually goes middle, top. So this is what it usually does. Middle, top, middle. So middle, top, middle, bottom, middle. Okay? But that's not what it did. And because it's not following that, we know since it went down that a is going to be a negative number. You know that a is going to be a negative value. So that means for this case, a is equal to -4. That's important because we're going to use that when we write our equation. We're also going to use k. Now, our period looks like here, then here are 5 points, here, here, and then here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is where our period ends, right here. This is our period where it ends. That's all one cycle. From there to here is one period. So that period is at 4 pi. So our period is equal to 4 pi. That's going to help us get our value for b. So 4 pi is equal to 2 pi over b. So what is b going to equal? Well, calculate that and see what you get. Good. Okay, you should have got 1/2 because if I take these and I multiply, I get 4 pi times b equals 2 pi, and then divide by 4 pi, divide by 4 pi. That cancels, and I get b is equal to 1/2, which makes sense because 2 pi times 2 is 4 pi. So this is another piece of important information when we're writing our answer. So let's see what we have. We found the amplitude, and we found the period. And the domain, let's list that. Domain is all real numbers. Our range goes as high as -2 and as low as -10. So -10 all the way up to -2. Remember, it's low to high. Again, if you want to write the inequality, you can. So now let's take all of the information that we have and write our equation. Okay, we know it's sine. So y is equal to a, which is -4, times sine b times theta. So b is 1/2, so that's going to be theta divided by b, or divided by 2. b is 1/2, so we're dividing by 2. And then we're going to add our k, and k we said was -6, so we're just going to write it as -6. And there's our answer. Again, you could write it this way, but I hope that you see more of a standard form. Instead of writing 1/2 times theta minus 6, I hope that you're putting this together and writing it as theta over 2, or theta divided by 2. All right, the last two problems, there's no graphing. Just want to see if you can identify these things, and we are using radians. Find the amplitude, the period, and the midline. Okay, amplitude, we get that information from A. A is 1/3, so our amplitude is the absolute value, which is 1/3. The period has to do with your B value. B is 1/5. So we're using radians, so we're going to say 2 pi divided by 1/5, or 2 pi times 5, which gives us 10 pi. So our period is 10 pi. And the midline, K is equal to, I don't see anything here, so that means K is equal to 0. So it's just going to be y equals 0. So see how simple that is? Didn't have to graph anything. Last one, try this one on your own. So turn your video off and then come back and see if you got the same answer. Okay, amplitude, period, and midline are the three things that you were supposed to find. A is equal to a -9, but remember the absolute value of that is not -9, so our amplitude is going to be 9. It is the absolute value of the A value, the absolute value of -9. All right, our period, if we notice that B is equal to 4, and we're using radians, we're going to say, what is 2 pi divided by 4? Well, that's just pi over 2. So our period is pi over 2. Or pi halves, or 1/2 times pi, however you want to say it. Pi over 2 is usually how we write it, pi divided by 2. And our midline has to do with our k. K is equal to -4, so y is equal to k. Y is equal to -4. All right, and that is it. The new part of this was seeing when a is a -1, or a negative value. It has to do with the direction of your graph, where it starts. Well, it's always going to start on or off, but then you have to ask yourself, is it going up or is it going down? Because that's going to determine whether your A is positive or negative. So definitely take a look back at -6 and review that a little bit, because that is where we had a negative value for our A. And then also on number 7, we had a negative value for our A, because with the sine, instead of going up and then down and then back up, it started going down first. So that tells me that it going down first is going to be a negative value for A. All right, that is all for the notes, and enjoy.